I'm Roy Neal, and we're here to discuss a subject of great importance to every flight crew member, trainee, or passenger who flies in aircraft from the Air Force. The subject is hypoxia, or what happens to your body when the cells either don't get enough or can't use enough oxygen. With me are 4 experts in different fields in the Air Force who are here to give us some insights into some of the dangers of hypoxia and also to discuss its causes, prevention, and treatment. Our guests are Brigadier General Charles E. Chuck Yeager, Director of Aerospace Safety; Colonel Giles W. Hall, Chief of Aerospace Physiology for Headquarters Air Training Command; Colonel Sidney T. Lewis, Flight Surgeon for the Life Sciences Group of the Air Force Safety Center; and Captain Roger Page, Jr., Instructor Pilot in the Undergraduate Pilot Training Program at Shepherd Air Force Base. And suppose we begin our discussion with General Yeager. General, you've had a long and distinguished career in the Air Force, first as a fighter pilot in World War II, and then as a test pilot for the first research rocket plane, the Bell X-1, first man to fly supersonic, later commandant of the Aerospace Pilot School, the Research Pilot School, now as Director of Aerospace Safety. And in that capacity, you're responsible for Air Force safety around the world. It's an awesome responsibility.
Yes, Roy, I've been around a long time. I suppose I've sort of grown up with the Air Force as it is today. And the job as the Director of Safety for the Air Force, I'm sort of responsible for all of the safety disciplines, not only flying, but ground and the whole shebang in trying to save our resources around the world.
Has hypoxia ever hit you?
Yes, very few pilots who have flown a lot, especially in the old days, have escaped the hazards of hypoxia or then anoxia. In World War II, we were flying quite a bit higher than our equipment would allow us or keep us normal. We were flying 36 to 38,000 feet with just the manned oxygen mask. We didn't have pressure breathing equipment in those days. I've seen a lot of bad experiences due to hypoxia. I think one of the ones that really impressed me the most was Joe Walker, an NACA pilot. We were doing some work on the X-4. I checked him out in the aircraft, and we were calibrating the airspeed systems. I was flying an F-86 on his wing, and I had 3 calibrated systems, airspeed systems on the F-86, and you go along and change the speed over the X-4, and then I would record the readings of my 3 systems as he was stabilized. And I noticed that Joe ran a point twice, and we were supposed to be changing, and I got up a little closer to him and looked him over, and I saw he didn't look too alert, and I asked him why he was doing this, and he became a little belligerent. And I knew we were at 25,000 feet, and the X-4 didn't have pressurization in the cockpit, so I had to get his attention and get him down, but since he had become belligerent, I told him that I had had a flame out and was going down. Would he follow me down, at least get him down below 15,000 feet? And I said, I'm flaming out and heading towards Poncho Barnes' ranch, a good place he knew. And so he did get excited enough and got out of his stupor to follow me down. But, you know, this really impresses you on how this thing can creep up on you. And it's just something that'll nail you if you're not careful.
Let's backtrack just a bit, if we may, General. Colonel Hall, isn't it true that hypoxia can occur both at sea level and at altitude?
Yes, quite easily, too. Give you a good example of hypoxia at sea level. I can just simply reach up and just squeeze like this and more or less strangle myself. It's an excellent case. Of course, we don't see too much of that. Another good example would be like a heart attack, anemia. shock. But our primary problem with hypoxia in the Air Force occurs when you ascend to altitude. And of course, this is caused by a reduction in partial pressure of oxygen.
In other words, failing to use the oxygen equipment properly?
Yes, and on occasion, you'll find that the equipment doesn't function properly itself. But I say, primarily our problems with hypoxia are caused by the pilot who doesn't display good oxygen discipline.
Captain Page, from your experience, can you give us any examples of something like that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I encountered a brief experience with hypoxia, which I'll consider due to equipment malfunction. While on a high-altitude student training mission, I felt a warm flush, tingling in the fingertips, and recognized my symptoms of hypoxia as I had been trained in the altitude chamber. I immediately selected 100% oxygen, and a pressure setting on the regulator initiated a descent. We passed down rather quickly. I had no problem. As soon as I got 100% oxygen, I recovered from the symptoms of hypoxia. Now this I consider important. I had done a price check 2 times on that equipment, once prior to leaving the squadron building and once after arriving at the aircraft. The equipment was in good shape and it checked out properly both times. However, after takeoff, several times during flight, I had moved my oxygen mask with my hand, and this perhaps caused the rip in the material near the valve that we discovered. And in this case, although it did happen, I think the example of equipment failure is very rare.
Colonel Lewis, what is the major concern here?
Well, oxygen equipment failure does lead to hypoxia, but more common is the misuse of the equipment or the failure to use the equipment. We've had 2 cases that were reported to us, and both of these occurred in F-102s, and both of the pilots involved were experienced pilots who had been through their physiological training and certainly should know how to use the equipment. But in the first case, the pilot was afraid that he was going to develop what we call delayed aerotitis media, which occurs after breathing 100% oxygen for prolonged periods of time and occurs when the oxygen in the middle ear is reabsorbed. He was going to resolve this problem by not using his equipment. And what he would do would be to get into the aircraft, make sure that there was sufficient oxygen in the aircraft, hook up his equipment, make sure it was functioning, and then he would turn the regulator off and let the oxygen mask dangle at the side of his face. He got away with this until one mission in which he was flying an intercept, and it was during an ORI, so he really wanted to make this intercept. And he was climbing up through 25,000 feet when his cabin altitude began to climb with him, and soon he had a cabin pressurization failure without oxygen, and he was trying to get to the target, and he passed out. And he really displayed his time of useful consciousness at altitude. And when he recovered, he was at 8,000 feet in an inverted spin, and he did recover the aircraft. Now, he could very well have ended up in a smoking hole, and we would have found that the cause of this accident was undetermined. But he did recover the aircraft, and he came back and told us about it, so we could pass this on to air crews so they won't make the same mistake that he did. So we do have these problems. In fact, we've had pilots who have removed their oxygen mask in order to smoke a cigarette.
General Yeager, would it be a fair statement that the primary causes of hypoxia, then, are equipment failure and failure to use the equipment properly?
Yes, Roy, there's many cases, accidents and incidents, where guys abuse their oxygen equipment. They lay a helmet and an oxygen mask out in the sun. You get dust in the valves, and it boils down that poor discipline when it comes to the use of the equipment can really cause accidents.
I'm sure there must be other factors, too, though. Smoking, fatigue. Colonel Lewis, can you comment on those?
Yes, smoking is one of our major factors. Individuals smoke have about 10% of their hemoglobin, and is tied up as what we call carboxyhemoglobin, and there's no value to carrying oxygen. So they are, in fact, hypoxic on the ground, and they have difficulties with this. So we do have other factors.
Let's see if we can pin this down somewhat. Colonel Hall, what are the symptoms of hypoxia?
Before you talk about the symptoms, you want to talk about the characteristics. The most important single characteristic of hypoxia is the simple fact that it's insidious. The term insidious, treacherous. It has a tremendous ability to sneak up and take your life before you know what happens. Now, when you speak about symptoms, they're very simple, very easy to remember. In fact, they're very similar to the early signs and symptoms of a person who's inebriated or just plain drunk. Poor coordination, lack of judgment. An obvious one is a headache. And then coinciding with all this is a dimming or a blurring of vision. But we're going to talk more about symptoms later.
How can you prevent and how can you treat hypoxia?
Oh, to prevent it is very easy. Good common sense. Just exercise good oxygen discipline. Now, to treat it, again, very simple. We have 4 rules that you should do. Number 1, when you get hypoxia, quite obviously, you want to get on 100% oxygen and descend down from altitude. Number 2, you should get on an emergency setting. 3, check your oxygen equipment. And then 4, and equally important, monitor your rate and depth of breathing, because you don't want to hyperventilate at a time like this.
So far, we've discussed the causes, the symptoms, the prevention, and the treatment of hypoxia. Might be a good idea now to get a basic explanation of the 4 different types of hypoxia. Colonel Hall, would you tackle that one?
I would suggest let's take a look at a short animated film we have, which clearly explains the 4 types of hypoxia and, of course, the various symptoms.
When we breathe, air is inhaled through the nasal passages into the lungs. The lungs are composed of millions of tiny air sacs, alveoli. All of them are surrounded by tiny blood vessels called capillaries. One alveolus and one of its capillaries show their function. As we breathe, the alveolus fills with air containing its normal percentage by volume of oxygen. Venous blood returning from the body cells releases carbon dioxide and takes on a fresh oxygen supply. In the body, under normal conditions, the amount of oxygen transferring depends upon the difference between the oxygen pressure in the alveolus and that in the blood. The heart pumps the blood to the body cells. In another pressure differential exchange, some 30% of the oxygen is absorbed. A cell needs that much for normal metabolism, the burning of nutrients, to produce energy, carbon dioxide, and other products. The carbon dioxide goes into solution in the blood for the ride back to the lungs through the veins. It's a continuous cycle of demand, supply, and delivery. When we increase bodily activity, the body cells demand more oxygen. Breathing deepens and speeds up to increase the supply, and heart action accelerates to increase the rate of delivery. However, when there is a shortage of oxygen in the body cells, their operating efficiency falls off. The body loses its efficiency directly. The effects are first apparent in the central nervous system, which demands a very large portion of all of the body's available oxygen, and is therefore highly sensitive to its reduction. The oxygen shortage to body and brain cells is hypoxia, resulting in decreased overall body efficiency. It varies from mild to severe. If not relieved, it increases in severity until unconsciousness and collapse occur. From the onset of hypoxia, many symptoms can be present in varying degrees. For a while, the body compensates as in exertion, but the action is barely evident, if at all, to the individual. Early in the hypoxic condition, visual acuity and peripheral vision lose sharpness. This may not be noticeable. Areas such as fingernails and lips where the blood is near the surface begin to turn blue. A sense of well-being and high self-confidence sets in. Perhaps tingling, dizziness, and nausea show up. Personality changes may occur. Mental faculties dull. Muscular coordination deteriorates until all control is gone. Finally, unconsciousness, followed quickly by collapse. At altitude, hypoxia is particularly dangerous. It's insidious. It sneaks up on you. It tells you you're doing great when you really aren't. It progresses so rapidly when severe oxygen shortage occurs abruptly that you may not have time to help yourself. it can lead to very serious consequences. There are 4 ways that oxygen quantity getting into the body cells can be reduced. Hypoxic hypoxia results from insufficient oxygen pressure in the lungs, a supply shortage. It occurs in suffocation, pneumonia, drowning, or reduced atmospheric pressure. As we go up, total outside air pressure decreases, and its oxygen pressure lessens correspondingly. The alveolus capillary oxygen pressure differential lowers. Less oxygen enters the blood. Less of it gets to the body cells. In slow ascent, this is the first phase of hypoxia. Slightly increased lung and heart action compensate easily for this oxygen deficiency. There are no noticeable effects, and the body still has some reserves. There are no time restrictions on flights below 10,000 feet. Between 10 and 15,000 feet, lung oxygen pressure gets so small that the blood can't meet normal body cell demands, even with full compensating efforts. Hypoxia is evident. Any additional exercise increases it immediately. From here to 20,000, compensation is completely inadequate. Hypoxia becomes severe. Physical and mental reserves are minimal. Unconsciousness is only minutes away. To 25,000, there is acute physical and mental incapacitation, leading to unconsciousness and, in time, convulsions, and finally to cessation of breathing and circulation. To fly at these high altitudes, we need full protection from hypoxia. So we hook on an oxygen supply. It feeds through a regulator and a mask. The regulator gives mostly air up to 10,000 feet. Then the regulator automatically adds more oxygen as altitude increases. This keeps lung oxygen pressure near a sea level equivalent as we go up. Between 28 and 32,000 feet, the mixer is delivering the 100% oxygen we need. Any leaks at the mask would let outside air in, reducing pressure. But by 40,000, even 100% oxygen on demand isn't enough to compensate for small leaks. Hypoxia is present again. So, back to approximately 28,000 feet. Now we add automatically a slight positive pressure. This helps to seal the mask to the face and keeps the lung pressure up. We stay ahead of hypoxia by adding pressure. The operational ceiling of present-day oxygen equipment is 43,000 feet. During emergency conditions, pressure demand oxygen equipment may be used up to 50,000 feet. This is the limit. But we have to fly a lot higher. Here is a device which will protect us at any altitude. It has a helmet and an inflatable suit which covers the body. The oxygen passes through the suit regulator to pressurize the body and feeds to the helmet for breathing. Its pressure to both varies automatically as required. Up to about 34,000 feet, the body's environment inside the suit is equal to the actual environment outside it. The suit holds the body at that altitude regardless of how high you go. You've got hypoxia licked. But there's yet another way to do it, a way that conserves oxygen and increases comfort. We use a relatively airtight cabin. We air pressurize it to keep the inside altitude lower than flight altitude. But compressors can't always keep inside altitudes safely below those where hypoxia affects us. A pressure demand oxygen system solves that problem. And cabins can lose pressure by puncture or by mechanical or material failure, gradually or abruptly. In either case, above 10,000 feet, you need oxygen. Time of useful consciousness, TUC, at 18,000 feet, averages 30 minutes. Your mask should be on or readily available. TUC gets smaller as we go up. Even in a pressurized cabin at 26,000, you need your mask attached to your helmet and ready for use. You need your mask on at 35,000 feet. At 43 to 45,000 and above, TUC is only a matter of seconds. In rapid decompression, TUC may be only half as long. So in a pressurized cabin, with a pressure demand oxygen system, you can cruise comfortably up to 43,000 feet. But that's still the body's safe limit for routine operations without a pressure suit. Add one to keep the body at 34,000 feet when the cabin altitude gets above that. You are automatically protected in decompression to any altitude. A second type of hypoxia, hypemic, results from a reduction of the oxygen-carrying capacity of the blood. One cause is blood loss, which reduces the number of red blood cells faster than the body can make new ones. The fewer the red blood cells, the less oxygen carried, the greater the degree of hypoxia. Carbon monoxide is another cause. When inhaled, the affinity of the red blood cells for it is 200 times greater than for oxygen. This markedly reduces the oxygen-carrying capacity of the blood. Severity of hypoxia depends upon the amount inhaled, but even in small quantities, as in smoking, it appreciably lowers the body's tolerance for altitude. Don't smoke excessively before flying. Always avoid engine exhaust gases, on the ground or in the air. It takes a long time to get it out of the system. Whenever you detect smoke or fumes of any kind, put your oxygen mask on, turn your regulator to 100%, and breathe at a normal rate. In a third cause of hypemic hypoxia, certain drugs inhibit the absorption of oxygen by the red blood cells and reduce delivery. The effect is basically the same as that from carbon monoxide. When you're ill, always see your flight surgeon. Never self-medicate. Stagnant hypoxia results from the slowing down or restriction to the flow of blood. There are 4 basic causes. The first comes from being uncomfortably cold. Internal mechanisms which maintain constant body temperature know that the body may live with frozen extremities. These mechanisms restrict the blood flow in the skin, arms, legs, and head, and slow it down to pool or stagnate, while they speed up circulation around the vital organs to keep them alive. There is less blood available for carrying oxygen. Temperature extremes such as heat or cold reduce altitude tolerance. Positive G forces are the most frequent cause of stagnant hypoxia. Centrifugal force pulls the blood from the head and pulls it in the lower extremities. Fighting uphill, its flow rate slows drastically. Vision is impaired, and soon after, blackout occurs. G suits exert pressure on abdomen and legs, retarding the blood pooling, and in turn helping to prevent blackout. Tensing muscles, particularly in the legs, and straining the abdomen while forcibly exhaling will help also. A third cause of stagnant hypoxia is immobility. Normally, the veins return the blood to the heart from the body at an adequate rate. Those leading up to the heart move it by a milking action. Tiny cup-like valves prevent backflow. Activity of the muscles around which the veins entwine keeps the milking flow going. When the muscles are immobile, vein action retards. Blood flow rate slows. Mild to severe hypoxia can result. In either case, altitude tolerance is reduced. The fourth cause of stagnant hypoxia is shock, the body's anesthetic to shield itself from suffering. Whenever we are hurt, or extremely hot, or see something distasteful or tragic, involuntary nerves do 2 things. They relax the heart so that it pumps less strongly, slowing the flow of oxygen-carrying blood to the body. And they expand the veins, creating a lower blood pressure. Venous pooling occurs. The oxygen supply is reduced and the brain cells become hypoxic. The greater the shock, the quicker the blackout. If you suffer uncomfortable pain in flight, shock may be imminent. Go to 100% oxygen breathe at a normal rate. Histotoxic hypoxia differs from the other types in that there is plenty of oxygen in the blood, but the body cells refuse to accept or use it. In normal metabolism, the body cells have set amounts of various catalysts, primarily enzymes. Some harmful chemicals, such as ethyl alcohol, as well as narcotics and barbiturates, disrupt the delicate metabolic enzymes. Metabolic rate decreases. The cells still need the normal oxygen supply being delivered, but their ability to absorb and use it is decreased. Hypoxia results. The recovery period from the effects of alcohol is also a dangerous time. Severity and duration depend upon the amount of alcohol consumed, the time in which it was consumed, and individual tolerance. Taking an already hypoxic body up to regions of lower atmospheric pressure compounds the hypoxia. Breathing 100% oxygen will not help a hangover or make you safe to fly with one. That's the hypoxia story. But there is yet another important condition which leads to a hypoxic state. This is hyperventilation. When we breathe faster and deeper than normally because of fear, anxiety, stress, or tension, we expel more than the normal amount of carbon dioxide from the lungs and in turn from the blood. Very rapidly, this upsets the acid-base balance of the blood, causing an insufficient amount of oxygen to be delivered to the body cells. One of the first symptoms of hyperventilation is dizziness. Treat it as follows. Go to 100% oxygen and initiate an immediate descent. Check your regulator for proper operation. Make sure that your connections are okay and that the mask fits properly. Go to an emergency setting and concentrate on breathing normally.
An interesting film that just about wraps up our discussion. General Yeager, any final comments?
Well, Roy, in the past history of the Air Force, hardly a day went by that there wasn't an incident report or an accident report where hypoxia was involved. But for every one of those incident reports or accident reports, there were 5,000 at least that were successful because the crews used good oxygen discipline. Now, it's pretty well up to the individual that flies in the airplane, whether he's the pilot or the navigator, or the loadmaster, or the flight engineer. Now, when we lose these airplanes, we can replace them. But when it's your neck, we can't replace it. So give it a lot of thought.